Hello YouTube, in this video I have something very special for you. It's a response to someone that is well respected within the YouTube fitness community, is well known, and has accepted to engage in conversation with me. The reason why I say accepted is because if you click on the video, you already know I put his name in the title. The reason why is because we've had a discussion with each other on his channel in his comments, and you'll see what the discussion was about. But it was basically a small back and forth, very polite, and it was basically an argument surrounding a certain topic. And when it happened, we sort of came to a point where we agreed to disagree, and we moved on. And a few days later, that person, Steve Shaw, made a video explaining his points. He basically went into details. And in the comments, I told him that I would be very interested in making a response video, which is this that you're watching right now, because Steve was nice enough to accept. I say nice enough because let's be honest and let's be clear. He has nothing to gain engaging in conversation with a small YouTube fitness channel. Zero. He's been at it for years, and him giving me the green light to do that, I truly appreciate, because it's going to help my channel a ton. Let's be honest, it's going to give me visibility, and two, it's going to establish this discussion as something that can be regarded as not a clash of arguments, but a suite of explanations surrounding a certain fitness topic that is very interesting, that is there to stay, so that people can revisit the videos if they want. So I have prepared an answer. I have my old document here, but because Steve didn't spend the video just reading something, I'm not going to be focusing too much on my notes either. It's going to be a conversation. The reason why I wanted to do that introduction is because I detest small YouTube fitness channels that start drama with bigger channels and name drop them to get views. I think it's not the right way to go. It's especially annoying when the arguments in the video are stupid. So I'm going to try and make as much sense as possible, and if I don't, please let me know in the comments. And I will be making tons of videos like this, but something you can be sure of is if I'm criticizing a thought or an opinion, I will always ask the person that is concerned if they're okay with me putting their name in the video. If they tell me no, I'm going to make the video, but I'm not going to name drop. I'm going to keep it general. As far as methods, training methodologies and programs, all that stuff, I'm not going to ask, just because it's public knowledge. It's something that I can purchase, and therefore I have the right to critique. But when it comes to attacking a man's opinion, I'm always going to check. And Steve was okay with that, so I'm really grateful for that. So, what was the question? What was the discussion about? The discussion was about front delts, and most specifically isolation of the front delt when it comes to developing your shoulder. I'm not going to just throw around Steve's opinion. I'm going to link his video in the description. I would like you to go watch his video, leave a like, leave a comment. Once that is done, you can come back here. If you do not want to watch his video for a reason X or Y, I'm going to recap his point so that I don't paraphrase him and I don't put words in his mouth. So let me start by saying that I have a lot of respect for Steve Shaw. I've been watching his channel ever since he started on YouTube. I've consistently watched him, which I usually don't stick to channels. I usually like to rotate, but he's someone that I've watched a ton. I agree with a lot of his ideas. And when it comes to credentials, he has tremendously more than I have. It's not even close. Okay, so let's not pretend like we're speaking equal to equal. He has a much bigger YouTube channel. He's been in the business for longer than I've been alive. He's been lifting for longer than I've been alive too, to be honest. He's accomplished certain feat of strength that I cannot even touch with a 10-foot pole. I think he's pretty big. He doesn't look bad at all. So that's something that I respect because he has the credentials and he has the body to show for it. But I still think that I can engage in conversation with people who, in the hierarchical pyramid of YouTube fitness, are much higher than me. Because that's conversation, right? We want to engage, we want to exchange ideas. So, because we're talking about a topic that was on Steve Show's channel, he was mostly, in my opinion, referring to powerlifting centric ideologies. This is a bodybuilding channel, so therefore I am biased towards bodybuilding. For this discussion, I'm going to try and keep it nuanced. I'm going to keep it general. And if I switch to one side or the other of the fence, I'm going to let you know if I'm more powerlifting specific, if I'm more bodybuilding specific in my argument. So, let's start. First, Steve says he's a staunch advocate of not doing front delt training. By that, he meant isolation of the front delt because, of course, he does advocate horizontal presses like the bench. He does advocate vertical presses like the overhead press. Here, my issue with this is that, in a sense, front delt training as a whole is often just resumed or summed up with presses because that's what most people do. So the mentality of saying, oh, presses are all you need for front delt development. It's true because that's what most people do, but it doesn't mean that it's optimal. It means that it gets the job done. And for powerlifters, it makes the most sense because you will train the presses that you're going to compete in. So you're going to do mostly bench variations because that's what you compete in. So of course, that's what your front delt is going to get the most stimulus from. That makes total sense. I just want to introduce the idea right now in this video that raises offer a different type of stimulus than presses when it comes to front delt development. And what you have to keep in mind too is that raises, be they front or lateral, have to be done with proper form, and you cannot criticize a lift just because most people do them wrong. If you go to a gym where most people butcher the bench, it doesn't make the bench a bad lift. It's just that they don't do it properly. And I think the front raise is probably one of the worst culprits of gym exercises that get completely sabotaged by people who swing, who bend the elbow, who do tons of weird rotation with their shoulders. I'm not going to teach you how to do front raises correctly in this video, but there is a proper way to do it. And it's very important. 2, Steve says that shoulder issues are a consistent problem in the over 45 crowd. Now, this is where I'm not comfortable speaking because I'm not over 45. Like he says, I'm a young whippersnapper. I don't know what it is to experience old age. My body is still young, it's still recovering fast, and I don't have that experience, that background to speak on the topic. So I'm not going to say he's wrong because most likely he is. He has that experience and I don't. But I do have a question to ask. What do these people who have bad shoulders when they're over 45 train the most? If you could see a tally of the tonnage they moved in their life, which lift would be the highest? I don't think it's going to be front raises. I think it's going to be horizontal presses. It's going to be vertical presses. So these two are the culprits of these people having bad shoulders when they age, which in a way Steve says. He never says front raises causes that, but it's going to be important for my argument later on. When it comes to the potential pressure and stress that presses put on the shoulders, I just want to counteract one argument he uses where he says he worked with a lot of athletes and he speaks about Pete Rubbish. Well, Pete Rubbish doesn't do front raises. He does have issues with his bench that were created because he benches. So the issues he has on other horizontal presses were created by an overabundance of horizontal presses. The reason I say that is because I am going to later introduce the idea that front raises could be used to alleviate shoulder stress, develop the muscles of the shoulders who help on the press, and basically prepare athletes for more longevity down the line. And I'm not just saying that randomly, I'm saying that because Pete Rubbish, who I've been following ever since the washing machine days, started doing curls. In his last blog, a year ago, he did curls. A powerlifter doing curls. Why? Because he had elbow problems. He had issues with his elbows, and therefore he did curls to balance the muscle ratio. He had too much triceps, not enough bicep. This argument goes with what Steve says when it comes to muscle imbalance. I just want to throw it out there, even though it sabotages my point a bit, because it shows that there are certain aspects of powerlifting and strength training in general that are being challenged, which might be also the case for front raises. And for the same thing for the curls, Elite FTS made a video a month ago where they spoke about doing curls for powerlifters for triceps issues. I still remember YouTube Fitness 5 years ago. You went on the powerlifting channel and you spoke about curls, people would laugh you out of the door. So the mentalities are changing when it comes to lifts. And I also want to finish on one thing, and that's something that I know from experience from knowing all the lifters. So I'm using my experience against his experience. All the men who cannot do presses can do raises. So when it comes to people over 45 who had bad shoulders, if we're talking about the fact that the training they did before created the bad shoulders, then my point is not relevant because I have no proof that doing raises early in life is going to prevent shoulder injuries. But I know that once the shoulder is injured by horizontal presses, doing front raises works. Those people can still make gains, especially with cables. I have people in my comments who can testify for that, who are over 50, who still train their shoulder in isolation with cables. 3, you do not need direct work for the front delt. I'm a bodybuilder. When you tell me that you don't have to isolate a muscle, I immediately raise an eyebrow. But if there is one muscle in the entire human body that I will agree does not need isolation, it's the front delt. It's probably the number one. So I agree with that. It makes much more sense to say that than to say, like some people say, that you don't need to isolate the biceps if you do rows and chin-ups. This is much more aggravating than the front delt theory. And this is where, because I just agreed with that point, I want to dive into something that I want to introduce now because it's going to be relevant. You've heard me talk about muscular imbalances. A muscular imbalance, having one, doesn't equal having a dominant body part. You can have a muscular imbalance within a group of muscles without any of the muscles being dominant. In a sense, one of them will be dominant by default because they're going to be stronger than the other muscles within that group, but as a whole, with the entire body, it's not dominant. It's just that its counterparts are not trained enough. And in the same vein, having a dominant body part doesn't equal having an imbalance. You can have a group of muscle with one body part that is extremely developed, but if the other two are also developed, there is no imbalance. There is a very strong muscle here, and there is a lesser strong muscle here. But the idea of an imbalance, in my opinion, I might be wrong, introduces the idea that that strong muscle creates a weakness that is going to lead to injury down the line, which I don't think is true. And I'm going to expand on that. But here, it's important to introduce the idea because I'm going to talk about it a lot. His 5th point, nothing guarantees that your front delt development will be with you as you age. Which means, if I go by his logic, that there will be no more protection for the shoulder. And therefore, the work that built the front delt most likely wore your tendon down, or the tendon gets aggravated as you age. But now all that isolation work you did is not there anymore because muscles protect the joint they surround. Okay, but I have a question. What wore the tendon down? What made it that the tendon of your shoulder is now hurting? Because this is not a natural evolution within the human DNA. Your body is not programmed to go up in flames when you're 50. I'm going to use examples from my life. Maybe it's non-specific, maybe it's just somehow the people I know who are superhuman. From where I come from, people work in the fields until they're 80, 90 years old. No one has bad knees, no one has a bad back, and certainly no one has bad shoulders. So, what is that one thing that the people who experience shoulder pain in their 40s and 50s have in common? In my opinion, it's the focus on horizontal presses, which if you're a powerlifter, there's no way around. In a sense, because in my opinion, there is a way around, it's just that people don't want to listen to it. As far as what I said before, and I said I would expand, I personally think that dominant body parts don't lead to injury. As I explained, having a dominant body part doesn't mean there's an imbalance. For me, it's the opposite. If you build a very strong body part, the joints that are being protected by that body part are going to be strictly stronger than the rest of the joints of your body, which are not being surrounded and kept safe by a very developed muscle. And just because the antagonist muscle of that strong particular fiber type or fiber group or whatever you want to call it, just because that antagonist muscle is not as strong doesn't mean that the joint is going to suffer injuries. And I have examples for that, because you never hear that logic of the front delt being applied to other muscles, or if it is, it's not applied properly. You will hear people say that having overdeveloped quads leads to knee injury. I disagree. As I explained before, it's not the fact that your quad is too developed that leads to injury. It's the fact that the hamstring and the glutes are not developed enough. I'm going to use my personal experience on that. I have garbage knees. I destroyed my right knee playing football. I destroyed my left knee playing basketball. Both these knees gave me tons of problems all the time. And eventually I managed to conquer all of these problems. What did I do? Well, yes, I worked my hamstrings, I worked my glutes, I focused on my forms, but the one thing I did is develop my quads. Once my quads became comically big and much bigger than the rest of my leg. You can go, if you don't believe me, I have videos where I flex my legs. You can see that my quads make up most of my legs. Ever since I did that and I over-focused on the quads, my knee problems went away. So I'm not saying it was just building up the quads, it was also building up the posterior chain, but my quad development protects me. It protects my knee. And in my opinion, it's the same for the front delt. I personally had tons of shoulder issues. I'm going to go back to that. Before, I found some ways to isolate the front delt without putting pressure on the AC joint and the rotator cuff with presses. And ever since I did that, my shoulder issues went away. I also worked the rear delt and the median delt, but I didn't give up on front raises. So that's what I wanted to say in regard to dominant body part. I think that the reason that logic of the dominant body part is especially applied to shoulders and also quads, like I say, is because most people build them through presses, which tax the shoulders, but it's not the muscular development of the shoulder that taxed the joint. It's the press, it's the method you used. It's the method of training that is the problem, not the isolation of the body part. And to go back to the point before, because I didn't say that, that logic is never applied to other body parts. You never hear someone say, don't work your lower back or else it will hurt you when you get older. It's not applied. Isolation of the lower back is actually recommended when it comes to staying safe on the deadlift and the squat. So unless you tell me that that muscle group is completely different from the ones that I cited before, then I need to understand the reasoning behind it. For me, a stronger muscle is a safer muscle. And let me finish by saying one thing. Yes, you have no way to know if your muscle development is going to be with you as you age, and you don't know if it's going to protect the rotator cuff when you get older. But studies and science and just common sense show that people who build a ton of muscle mass young keep that muscle mass later in life, and it helps them navigate life as an older person, because that muscle mass does, unless you stop moving, it doesn't shrink if you're natural. And then the sixth point, this video is going to be long. Steve says that if you seek overdevelopment, it should be in the rear and the medium delts, meaning that if you're going to grow your shoulders, you should focus on these two areas. I say yes, I agree. One thing though is, as I said before with dominant body parts and imbalances, the antagonist muscle groups create support that help the main movers. When you press on a bench press, the main movers are not your real delts. What your real delts do is they offer a shelf for the shoulder to basically sit in so that the front delts can work properly and safely, so that you can tuck them in and they're nice and safe when you press. If they're weak, you won't be able to maintain form, and therefore then the dominant muscle groups take over. You bench with that rounded position and you use too much rotator cuff, and then you can hurt yourself. So I agree with Steve on that. 7, he also says that I have no insights because I don't have the age and I don't have the experience. These are both true. I'm just a guy who's been training for a while, who is throwing ideas out there. Whether these ideas get an answer or not doesn't really matter. I just want to throw them out there. Am I right? I don't know. I don't really care if I'm right. What I care about is discussion, because we need to keep this thing moving. YouTube fitness is in a state of stagnancy, and I think mostly it's due to YouTube policies, but I won't get into that. I don't really care about their policies. I'll do what I want. And if I want to discuss it with someone like Steve, who's been very polite and courteous and is willing to exchange, I will. And if I'm completely wrong, I'm completely wrong. That's completely fine. And then we get into the part where Steve quotes Christian Thibodeau, which is someone I follow too. And that's where I'm like, man, that's where you sort of lost me, because you speak about the front delt of a bodybuilder being 5 times larger than those of the non-lifters. First off, I think that example is not a good example, simply because that 5 times number seems so big, but at the end of the day, it's really not, because the front delts are a very small muscle group. So of course, if it's 5 times larger than those of a non-lifter, in their heads, people think, oh, 5 times larger, it's insane. It's not that much of a difference. It is a visible difference, but it's not the same as if someone had like 5 times larger, I don't know, traps, or 5 times larger quads, like one area of the quads, like the what is called the tier. It has a scientific name, but 5 times larger in that case would be quite visible. But with a smaller muscle, for me it's sensationalism. I just want to throw out there too that bodybuilder shoulders, at least at the pro level, so people who are not natural, the biggest part of the shoulder tends to be the medium and real delt. That's what gives them that round look. It's also the reason why for natties, we don't get that look, because we do have a front delt that is more in tune with the rest of the shoulder. Just throwing it out there. And it also means nothing because bodybuilders all of their muscles are going to be bigger than non-lifters. It's the point of bodybuilding. So I really don't like that example. And I especially don't like that example because they then talk about rear and medium delts. When I say they, I mean Thibodeau. And they say that those parts of the shoulders are neglected by most lifters. But bodybuilders are not most lifters. Bodybuilders care a ton about their rear delts and medium delts. And now we're moving the goalpost because now it's comparing the rear and medium delts of lifters to non-lifters. We're not talking about bodybuilders anymore. And it's basically saying that the size of the rear delts and medium delts of non-lifters is similar to the ones of lifters. But who are lifters? I know people who go to the gym 40 minutes a week who call themselves lifters. Of course, these two populations have the same size of rear delt and medium delt. They both don't train it. If you had kept the comparison going between bodybuilders and non-lifters, then it would make sense. The reason why it wasn't done, in my opinion, is because if you compare non-lifters with bodybuilders, you will find that bodybuilders also have 5 times the size when it comes to the other heads of the shoulders. And I also want to ask one thing. Do bodybuilders have problems with their shoulders? Is it a thing? If you ask a group of 100 veteran powerlifters, a group of 100 veteran bodybuilders, who has the most shoulder problems? Unless you picked the broest of bodybuilders who bench with a terrible form, I think the powerlifters have the worst shoulder problems of all. Why? Because they're forced to compete in a lift, the bench, that puts tons of stress on the rotator cuff and the ACL. Bodybuilders don't care. This is why we get to do front raises if we want to grow the shoulder. We're not limited by a press, we can do whatever you want. And I'm not taking a dig at powerlifting. Powerlifting is a sport, you have to follow the rules. But pointing out the fact that the rules can sometimes lead to injury, I don't think it's a critique, it's just an observation. 10, and I already talked about that, I had problems personally with my shoulders when I was powerlifting because I was benching too much. And at the time, I was doing more rear delt work than I'm doing now. Now I have no problems. And I added more isolation of the front delt in my training, which is not an argument because it's just me. I'm not a pool of individuals. I'm just one guy. I'm just saying. In my opinion, when people injure their shoulders, it is never the muscle that gets injured. It's what's underneath. And when they get injured, the main culprits are internal rotation or any types of presses. Internal rotation on the front delts of the shoulder in front raises is certainly possible, 100%. I can see some people do it like this, but you would need to be extremely stupid. When it comes to horizontal presses, I see tons of people with internal shoulder rotation who bench like this. And I think, and that's another issue, I don't think Steve is a minimalist at all. But I do think he loves his compound movements, which there's nothing wrong with that. But he does say people should overhead press to balance the horizontal presses because if you've watched that video to this point, you might think that Steve is not aware that horizontal presses put stress on the shoulders. He is well aware. He knows his stuff. I'm not telling anything new that he doesn't know. But I think personally that telling people to balance horizontal presses with vertical presses sometimes doesn't work. Why? One, because the form and the mobility especially that is required for overhead press, most people don't have. So they're going to press like this, like I see tons of people do, or they're not going to go all the way down, they're going to start here and just do that top portion. This is not going to correct any imbalance you might have, it might make it worse. And the second thing is, as I said, it's part of my first point. Most people don't go through the full range of motion in overhead press. I personally don't either. But at least you should at least lock the shoulders and hold the weight overhead to engage the entirety of the traps. That's going to help prevent shoulder injuries. I'm not saying Steve is wrong when he says that about the overhead press. I'm just telling that most people are noobs and noobs usually do these things, which make the shoulders fall even worse. And to finish this video, because it's already quite long, we're going to talk, actually no, I'm not done, wow. Okay, I have a question for Steve and for anyone who's watching. What is better, an overdeveloped front delt with developed medium and real delt, or everything being well balanced but being just developed? So either very developed front delt with okay medium and rear, or just okay front delt and medium. Which is better? Which is going to lead to injury? If you believe in the muscular imbalances create injury and the muscular imbalance is created by a muscle group that is much bigger, then you will tell me that having everything at the same level is better for safety. I personally don't think that. I think that a strong front delt is going to prevent injuries as long as you're not completely lacking in rear and medium delt. And that's basically my point, is strengthening a muscle will prevent injury. And I think that, and again, we're going back to the overhead press, sticking to only one type of movement for hypertrophy leads to overuse injury. And I had a killer argument. Where is it? Where is it? It was an argument d'autorité. It was perfect. Oh, it's here. Steve speaks about his experience with powerlifters. I have nothing to say against that. I did use the Peach Rubbish example. Now I have an example that goes directly in my direction. Two names, Dan Green, James Strickland. Two incredible powerlifters. Two that, from what I know, never had massive issues with their shoulders. Or if they have, they've decided to use certain methods to strengthen them. Dan Green does front raises. Dan Green does super heavy front raises. I don't want to throw a number, but I know it's more than 50 pounds. James Strickland, if you follow his training, which I do because he's one of my favorite powerlifters, he does raises. He doesn't do front, but he does a ton of side raises and everything to strengthen the shoulders. What are those two guys doing? They're using a different movement, a different plane of motion to stimulate the shoulders without taxing the ACL and the rotator cuff to build that shoulder muscle. Because they know that even though the movement is not specific to the sport, the muscle that is being built is. Because whether you build your front delt through presses or raises, it's still getting beefier, it's still getting stronger. Of course, you're not getting the neural adaptation of the presses, so you're not building strength through that neural pathway, but you're building muscle that's going to help you with strength and to stay injury-free. So if you have issues with the horizontal presses taxing the shoulder and you want shoulder development, doing raises or front raises is not a bad thing, in my opinion. And if James Strickland or Dan Green want to comment under the video, they're welcome. I don't think they'll ever see this. So that's what I say, sticking to only one type of movement for hypertrophy can lead to overuse injury. And to finish, and I promise that that's my last point, I'll speak about kyphotic posture. So the kyphotic posture is when your shoulders are protruded and you're like this. This is bad, why? Because you're going to carry this position into the bench and you're going to bench like this. So you're going to hurt your shoulder. In my opinion, it's mostly an issue of posture because the kyphotic nature of the curvature of the spine comes from a thoracic rounding of the spine. You'll usually never see people who are very straight and just like this. They're usually also like this. They're usually also tilted forward. And what you need to develop, like Steve knows, to make sure that those shoulders get pulled back is the muscles of the scapular belt, so the traps, the real delts. But, and I'm going to read this, dropping front delt isolation because you need to do more medium and real delts isolation makes no sense. And that logic is never applied to other body parts. You never hear that for other body parts. When you lack in an area, do you often hear people tell you, oh, work on these muscles and stop isolating that area? No, you don't. And Steve doesn't advocate for that. I'm not saying he does. Because he's not saying if you have bad shoulders, just stop anything that works the front delt. and focus on the antagonist muscles of the front delt. But I am saying that if that, and in my opinion, if and because it's that movement that's creating the pain in the shoulder, if you're going to have to give up on that movement because of there's too much pain and you're afraid it's going to lead to permanent injury, it doesn't mean you have to only focus on the rear and medium delt. You can get some front delt development with no stress with raises. So as I say, it makes sense for shoulders, like Steve says, but what needs to be dropped is the high frequency horizontal presses, especially if there is no variation. What does not need to be dropped is the front delt work, because you need your front delt to be strong to prevent injury. So just doing, for someone who has shoulder issues, I think that just telling them do more real delt work is not going to cut it. Usually, those methods work because they replace the presses they've been doing by rear and medium delt. So of course, they stop doing the movement that hurts them. They do work for the antagonist muscle groups, and then they say, oh, because I stopped working my front delt, my shoulders felt better. Well, no, they felt better because you built up the antagonist muscles and you stopped doing the movement pattern that hurt the joint of the shoulder. I guarantee you, if these same people would have done some front raises with cables, they would have seen more gains in the front delt, which is not a bad thing, as I explained. With no pain, the recurrence of the pain wouldn't be there. So in a sense, dropping front raises for real delts is good, but if you don't apply that logic to horizontal presses, it becomes an issue. And that's it. That's my video, that's the answer. So I know that we do not evolve in the same wood. Steve and me, he's a powerlifter, I'm a bodybuilder. I don't know if you'll ever watch that video. That video is gonna be long. I don't know how long it is, but it's gonna be long. I know he doesn't have time to deal with that. I could sense that in his comments. When we first exchanged comments, he was not really answering to my points. He was just using the fact that he had more experience as an argument of authority, which I understand. It's YouTube. He probably has to deal with trolls 15 times a week. He doesn't have the time or the energy for that, and I'm fine with it. I just want to say I'm grateful for him and for his invitation to make that video. He accepted, and whether he answers or not, I think that this argument is always healthy to have. It's a topic that people think about all the time and that I'm very interested in. So if he answers, I'll make another response video to him. If he doesn't, I'm still happy that this happened. Thank you for watching. If you have a comment, please let me know, and all of the points will be detailed in the description. Have a good day.